The one cardinal rule for zookeepers is never take your eyes off the animals when entering their enclosure. But all it takes is 1 second, one glance away, one distraction, and it could all be over. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. What began as a small petting zoo in the 1940s became one of the most popular tourist attractions in Israel. It's now a thriving zoo housing more than 2,000 animals and is renowned for its successful breeding of endangered and locally extinct species. With such a prestigious reputation, the zoo employs the most dedicated staff. They are highly skilled, highly trained, and completely devoted to the welfare of the animals. But on Sunday, August 18, 2024, the unthinkable happened. One of the most experienced zookeepers in the zoo was performing routine maintenance inside one of the enclosures. But this wasn't just any enclosure, this was the crocodile enclosure. The man has not yet been named, but we shall call him Yosef for the purposes of this video. Yosef was 45 years old and had devoted his entire adult life to the conservation of wildlife. He had followed his passion for animals that he had developed as a young boy and had worked as a zookeeper for 20 years. Working in Jerusalem Biblical Zoo was a dream job. He was surrounded by the animals he had been fascinated by since childhood, and his work was rewarded when he was given more responsibilities by the zoo managers and senior staff. Before the zoo opened, the staff began their duties. Enclosures needed cleaning, animals needed feeding, and food outlets needed stocking for the paying public. Yosef made his way to the crocodile enclosure. Tall metal fences surrounded a dried-out concrete hollow where crocodiles could swim when it was full of water. Green grass sprouted sparsely from the dusty brown perimeter that ran along the fence line. Visitors could view the crocodiles through large glass windows, watching as staff threw scraps of meat from wooden platforms that protruded into the enclosure. The feeding of the crocodiles always wowed the audience as they watched the reptile's impressive jaws snap closed with lightning-fast speed. That morning, Yosef stepped into the enclosure. The crocodiles were at the far end, nowhere near the experienced keeper. Yosef was tasked with mending a small section of the enclosure. Keeping his eyes on the animals at all times, Yosef knelt down to repair a small hole in the fencing. Work like this was routine, and he had performed it multiple times before. Rule number 1 was never take your eyes off the animals while inside their domain. But something happened that morning, something that distracted Yosef, and he broke the cardinal rule. He took his eyes off the crocodiles. Whatever it was, Yosef glanced away from the dried-up pond, letting his guard down in the most dangerous of locations. It only took a second, but it was a second that would change his life forever. He didn't notice one of the animals approaching him. It scuttled out of the dried-up concrete pond, silently and swiftly, rushing toward the unsuspecting keeper. Its head swayed from side to side as its short legs carried it across the ground. When Yosef lifted his head, it was too late. The crocodile lunged at him. It brought its jaws crashing down on Yosef's upper body. With a bite force of around 4,000 psi compared to our own of around 200 psi, the damage was incredible. Considered to have the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, it's impossible to pry open a fully grown crocodile's jaws. But Yosef wasn't giving up that easily. He fought back, screaming and shouting for help as he did so. He tried to poke the animal in its eyes or bash it on the snout, but the attack was so ferocious, so rapid and dramatic that it was hard to comprehend what was going on. All Yosef could see was a whirlwind of green-brown scales, sharp white teeth, and thick, knobbly skin. It felt like an eternity, and no one came. He was all alone with one of the world's most lethal predators. But Yosef's colleagues had heard the commotion and ran to see what was going on. The scene they arrived at was one of horror. Their friend was underneath one of the crocodiles, wrestling for his life. With no way to stop the attack themselves, they immediately radioed through to the security guard. He jumped onto his motorcycle and raced to the crocodile enclosure. Tearing through the park, Swerving along the walkways, he raced to the scene. Leaping off the bike, ripped his gun from his holster and raised it in front of him. Without hesitating, he took aim and fired at the crocodile. He had to be sure of his shot, a foot or two in either direction, and he could have easily shot Yosef. The crocodile reeled in pain as the bullets hit it. It immediately let go of its meal and scuttled away from him. The crack from the gun rang out across the zoo, alerting others that something was going on. Police were called and raced to the zoo entrance. Unclear messages about shots being fired and a possible crocodile attack came through from the station, but officers weren't sure what they would find when they arrived. Inside the enclosure, Yosef lay motionless on the dry, dusty ground. Blood pooled around his body. 2 of the crocodiles had been shot and recoiled a short distance away. Cautiously, emergency services and zoo staff made their way into the enclosure. Yosef, he was in a very bad way and barely breathing, but he was still alive. They lifted him out and into a waiting ambulance. He was rushed to the trauma unit at Hadassah Ein Kerem, just 10 minutes away, and straight into surgery. He was in a mess. The crocodile had bitten him repeatedly. With every snap of its jaws, the teeth had sliced through skin, muscle, and down to the bone. The crocodile had mostly devastated Yosef's upper body and face. In surgery, a team of anesthetists, oral and maxillofacial specialists, orthopedic and plastic surgeons worked on the 45-year-old for 9 hours. At the time of making this video, Yosef remained in critical condition, heavily sedated, ventilated, and in intensive care. His family and friends can only hope and pray for his full recovery. With Yosef out of the enclosure, the zoo's staff turned their attention to the crocodiles. The crocodile that had attacked Yosef had been struck multiple times by bullets. At first, it seemed like the damage to the enormous beast was minimal, but that night, its injuries became apparent. Despite the best efforts of Dr. Nili Evan-Megan, the veterinary director at the zoo, and the rest of the vet team, the crocodile died from its wounds. A second crocodile was injured by bullets, but is expected to make a full recovery. The whole shocking incident thankfully took place before the zoo opened to the public. Had paying guests been visiting at the time, the situation could have been worse. Not only was Yosef lucky that he had not been dragged into water, but it was lucky that the other crocodiles in the enclosure didn't join in the attack, leading to a feeding frenzy that would have almost certainly killed Yosef instantly.